Have you ever felt like you weren't enough? Like the person in the mirror just didn't measure up? Our story today is for anyone who's ever felt that way. It's about a woman named Clara, whose heart carried a whisper she couldn't shake. I'm not pretty. And it's about a cowboy named Jesse, whose quiet words were about to start a revolution in her soul. Clara had always been the sensible one, the reliable friend. She saw beauty everywhere, in the blush of a sunset, in the intricate patterns of a frost-covered windowpane, but never in herself. Her reflection felt like a stranger, someone plain and forgettable. Boys in high school had overlooked her for the cheerleaders, and as she got older, she just accepted it. She built her life around her mind, her kindness, her work as a librarian, creating a world of beautiful stories because she didn't believe she could be part of one. One autumn afternoon, a traveling rodeo came to her small town. The air buzzed with excitement, a stark contrast to Clara's quiet life. Her friends dragged her along, and that's where she saw him. Jesse. He wasn't loud or flashy like the other cowboys. He had a stillness about him, kind eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, whether he was calming a nervous horse or just leaning against a fence post. They ended up at the same food stall, both reaching for the last bottle of water, their hands brushed. A jolt, small but electric, shot up Clara's arm. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You can have it," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Clara, flustered, just mumbled a thank you and hurried away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was sure he hadn't given her a second thought. But he had. Later that evening, as the dust settled and the crowds thinned, Jesse found her sitting on a bale of hay, away from the main festivities, lost in a book. He walked over, not with a swagger, but with a quiet respect for her space. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Clara looked up, surprised he'd even remembered her. She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. They started talking. Not about the rodeo, but about books, about the stars that were beginning to pepper the darkening sky, about the feeling of being small in a big world. Clara found herself opening up in a way she never had before. With Jesse, there were no pretenses. He listened truly, listened, his gaze steady and warm. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to be witty or brilliant. She could just be Clara. As the night grew colder, he offered her his jacket. It smelled of leather, dust, and something uniquely him. Wrapped in its warmth, feeling safer than she had in years, the old familiar insecurity crept back in. Why was he being so kind? He could have any woman here. He must be just feeling sorry for the lonely librarian. The thought coiled in her stomach. She had to say it, to break the spell before it broke her heart. She pulled the jacket tighter and looked at her worn-out sneakers. "I don't understand," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you talking to me?" He looked confused. "Why wouldn't I be? Because—" "Well, look at me," she said, a bitter little laugh escaping her lips. "I'm not pretty." The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. She braced herself for the polite denial, the awkward pat on the shoulder, the inevitable retreat. But Jesse didn't do any of that. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Clara's heart sank. She'd ruined it. Then he turned to her, his expression serious, his eyes holding hers. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Being pretty is like a house with a fancy coat of paint. It looks nice from the road, sure. People might slow down, take a picture. But it doesn't tell you a thing about what's inside. It doesn't tell you if the foundation is strong, if it's warm in the winter, if it's filled with light and laughter. It doesn't tell you if it's a home." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm not interested in a fancy coat of paint. I'm a builder. I look for a good foundation. I look for a place that feels like coming home." He reached out and gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You, Clara. You feel like coming home?" Clara stared at him, speechless. No one had ever said anything like that to her. He wasn't telling her she was beautiful. He was telling her she was so much more. He was seeing past the surface she'd always hated, and he was valuing the structure, the core of who she was. It wasn't a compliment, it was a revelation. It was as if he'd handed her a new set of eyes to see herself with. The rodeo left town a few days later, but Jesse stayed. He got a job at a local ranch. He and Clara spent their days exploring the countryside and their nights talking under the stars. He never called her pretty. Instead, he'd point out other things. He'd say, I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about a book you love. Or, your kindness is like a shade tree on a hot day. He was building her up not with empty flattery, but with solid, observable truths about her character. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Clara began to change. She started looking in the mirror, and instead of seeing flaws, she saw the eyes Jessie loved. She saw the face of a woman who was kind, who was strong, who was a home. The word pretty began to lose its power, shrinking from a monstrous judgment into an irrelevant adjective. What did it matter if the paint was fancy when the foundation was solid? Years passed. Jessie and Clara built a life together, a home filled with books, laughter, and a deep, quiet understanding. Their love wasn't a firework display. It was a steady, warming hearth. One evening, they were sitting on their porch, watching their own children play in the yard. Clara was older now. There were lines around her eyes from years of smiling and strands of silver in her hair. She leaned her head on Jessie's shoulder, feeling a profound sense of peace. She caught her reflection in the darkened window pane. She saw an older woman, a mother, a wife. And for the first time, with absolute certainty, a thought bloomed in her mind, clear and bright. I am beautiful. She turned to Jessie, tears welling in her eyes. Do you remember that first night? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. What you said to me? He smiled, that same slow, genuine smile from all those years ago. He wrapped his arm around her. I remember, he said softly. I finally understand, she whispered. It took me all this time, but I finally truly understand. He didn't have to ask what she meant. He just held her closer. The beauty he had seen in her all along wasn't something to be found on the surface. It was the home she had been and the home they had built together. It wasn't about a coat of paint. It was about the unshakable foundation of a life well loved. This story reminds us that true worth, true beauty, isn't about how you look to the world. It's about the strength and warmth you hold within. It's about being a place where love can feel at home. If you've ever felt like Clara, remember this. You are more than a surface. You are a foundation. You are a home. And that is a beauty that no mirror can ever truly reflect, and that time can never fade. The wind was sharp that evening, carrying dust across the quiet ranch road where the sky blazed orange and purple. Emma stood beside her old car, her fingers tapping nervously against the metal, the same way her heart tapped against her ribs. She had come to Willow Creek Ranch for work 3 months as a stable helper. Nothing fancy, nothing special. Just another temporary job in a life that had never felt steady. She pulled her jacket tighter. This place felt too open, too big, too honest. A place where you couldn't hide behind makeup or city noise or the walls she'd built for years. Out here, silence didn't let you pretend. It made you confront yourself. Footsteps crunched on gravel. She turned and saw him. Caleb Hayes, the cowboy the locals spoke about the way people talk about storms or miracles. Soft-spoken, steady, with eyes that saw more than he said. A man carved from dust, sun, and quiet courage. His presence made everything around him feel grounded and real, as if life itself paused to listen when he walked by. Emma instantly felt small, too plain. To her. Caleb stopped a few feet away. You must be the new helper. His voice carried warmth, like campfire heat spreading through cold bones. She nodded, trying to find her voice. Yeah, Emma. He tipped his hat slightly. Welcome to Willow Creek. But Emma didn't feel welcomed by anything, not the sky, not the land, and least of all by herself. The reflection she'd seen earlier in her car window had stirred a familiar ache. Tired eyes, faded freckles, hair that refused to be styled, a face that looked forgettable. Caleb lifted her suitcase easily, as if he were picking up a feather instead of the entire weight of her insecurities. Cabins this way. As they walked, the ranch dogs ran circles around Caleb, barking happily. Emma noticed how they adored him. No hesitation, no judgment. She wished she could trust that easily. She wished she could believe someone could look at her with that kind of affection. But wishes, she knew, were dangerous things. The sun dipped low. Shadows stretched. And with each step, the words clung heavier to her tongue. Words she shouldn't say, but needed to spill before they swallowed her whole. Caleb? He glanced at her. Yeah? Her voice barely escaped, a cracked whisper carried by the wind. I'm not pretty. She hated how vulnerable she sounded. How raw. She regretted the words the moment they left her mouth. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. He wasn't the person. But Caleb stopped walking, and the world seemed to stop with him. He looked at her slowly, not at her clothes, not at her face, but into her, like he had been waiting for her to speak the truth she'd been holding onto for years. Then he said, in a voice so gentle it felt like a hand settling over a trembling heart, "That's fine." Emma blinked, stunned. Caleb stepped closer, not invading, not pushing, just existing in that quiet, steady way of his. "Pretty washes off in the rain," he said softly. "Pretty changes with the light. Pretty fades when life gets rough." His eyes held hers with a truth she wasn't ready for but desperately needed. "I need honest, not fancy." The words landed deeper than a compliment ever could. Because he wasn't saying she was wrong. He was saying she didn't need to be anything more than real. Emma swallowed hard, unable to respond. Something thawed in her chest, something that had been frozen for years. Caleb gave a small nod, as if the moment didn't shake the earth beneath them. "Come on, let's get you settled." He walked ahead toward the cabin. Emma stayed still for a moment, feeling the wind shift around her, feeling the world tilt, feeling something she had forgotten how to feel. Hope, the kind that starts slow, quiet, barely noticeable, until one day, it becomes the reason your life changes. And Emma had no idea that tonight's whisper would become the beginning of a story that would change not just her life, but his. The morning sun crept over the hills, painting the ranch in liquid gold. I stood outside the cabin, breathing in the crisp, clean smell of hay and morning dew. The night before kept replaying in my mind Caleb's words, his steady, calm tone, the way he didn't even flinch at my confession of insecurity. "I need honest, not fancy." The words were a strange mix of comfort and terror. I wasn't used to anyone seeing past the surface. Most people looked at me and made up their minds instantly. Some with pity for what they thought I lacked. Some with complete disinterest. And some, the coolest ones, with a kind of smug amusement. But no one had ever bothered to stop long enough to notice the truth I carried just beneath my skin. Yet Caleb had, and that one simple fact made everything feel different. Like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. When I reached the stables, he was already there, sleeves rolled up, methodically brushing down one of the horses. He didn't look up right away when I approached, not because he didn't care, but because that was just who he was. He was a man who didn't demand attention, who didn't force his presence on you. He simply made space for you to come closer on your own terms. It was disarming. "You're early," he said, a faint smile touching his lips as he finally glanced my way. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, reaching for a brush and joining him. "Good," he replied, his voice low and rumbling. "Means the ranch is already working on you." We worked side by side, the silence between us feeling natural and easy, not awkward or strained. I found myself watching him out of the corner of my eye, the way he moved with an unhurried grace, the way his presence filled the barn with a quiet, unshakable strength. He wasn't a man who tried to impress. He wasn't charming in that loud, flashy way some men are. He was steady, dependable. The kind of man whose character revealed itself slowly over time, like turning the pages of a book you never wanted to end. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Caleb finally spoke, his voice gentle but direct. "Why'd you say what you said last night?" I froze, my hand hovering over the horse's back. He didn't say it accusingly. He said it like someone offering a hand to a person afraid of falling from a great height. I don't know. I forced a weak, shaky laugh. Maybe I just felt small. Caleb nodded, taking a moment before responding. He never rushed his words. "You don't owe me an explanation, but just so you know." He paused, wiping his hands on the worn denim of his jeans. "This ranch isn't a place where people come to hide from themselves. If you stay here, life will show you exactly who you are." His words struck something deep inside me, like a bell ringing in an empty room. Maybe he saw too much. Maybe that's why I felt both completely safe and utterly terrified around him. Before I could figure out how to respond, a sharp, panicked neigh cut through the morning air. A young horse, one of the newer arrivals, was pulling hard against its rope, its eyes wide with fear, kicking up dust and dirt. I saw then a wound on its hind leg. Fresh, raw, angry red. Caleb's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. All his easy calm was replaced by a focused, brave intensity. "Emma, stay back," but something pulled me forward instead. "He's scared." "So are you?" Caleb said gently, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. He wasn't wrong. But fear wasn't new to me. I'd lived with it for so long it felt like a second skin, and I knew it didn't always have to win. Slowly, carefully, I approached the terrified horse, speaking in a soft, low voice. "It's okay. I know it hurts. You're not alone," the horse snorted. Its body still tense, but my voice seemed to steady him. Caleb watched, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Maybe respect. I reached out and placed a gentle hand on the horse's neck. The animal's trembling slowed. Its frantic breathing began to even out. Caleb murmured, his voice laced with wonder, "You've done this before." I nodded, my throat tight. My dad had horses. Before things fell apart. Caleb said nothing, but his silence wasn't empty. It felt like a warm blanket being wrapped around a painful, jagged memory. Together, we tended to the wound. I cleaned it gently while Caleb steadied the horse, his strong hands calming the animal with a quiet authority. Our own hands worked inches apart, our breaths sinking without us even noticing. And in that shared task, something shifted between us. It felt like the beginning of a bridge being built across a chasm, connecting two cliffs that had always been separate. When we were done, Caleb finally really looked at me. "You didn't hesitate," he said softly. I shrugged, brushing the dirt from my palms. "Sometimes, when I see someone else hurting, I forget about myself." He nodded, his eyes lingering on my face a moment too long. "That's not weakness, Emma. That's a strength most people will never understand." My heart stuttered. No one had ever said that to me before. No one had ever seen value in the parts of myself I'd always been taught to hide, to feel ashamed of. The afternoon passed in a series of small conversations and shared moments that felt bigger than they were. I laughed a real, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like years. And Caleb, a man who rarely showed more than a quiet, reserved smile, found himself watching me like I was sunlight breaking through a sky full of clouds he'd long grown used to. As evening settled over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, we walked back toward the cabins. I hesitated before going inside my own. "Caleb?" I said softly. He turned, waiting. I looked down at the ground, twisting my fingers nervously. "Why don't you care about appearances?" "Mine, I mean." Caleb took a slow breath and stepped a little closer. His voice dropped to that same warm, steady tone that had shaken me from the inside out the night before. "Because fancy fades," he said. "It's easy to fall for something shiny. But I'm building a life, not buying decorations." My breath hitched in my throat. He continued, his gaze unwavering. "Pretty doesn't raise a family. Pretty doesn't stand beside you when life gets ugly. Pretty doesn't hold your hand when everything falls apart." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But honest does. Honest stays." I felt tears prick my eyes, but for once, they weren't the painful kind. They were the freeing kind. The kind that felt like they were washing away years of doubt and self-criticism. Caleb stepped back, giving me space, a silent gesture of respect. "Good night, Emma." As he walked away toward his own cabin, I stood frozen under the dim porch light, my hands pressed to my chest, feeling the frantic beat of my heart. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel unworthy. I didn't feel like I was not pretty. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt real. And I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Because the girl who whispered, "I'm not pretty," into the darkness was about to discover a kind of love that would rewrite every chapter she thought she already knew. The following days slipped by like pages turning on their own, each one pulling Emma deeper into a life she hadn't expected to find, one built on routine, quiet moments, and a growing warmth she was almost afraid to name. Every morning, Caleb greeted her with that same soft, silent nod. Every evening, they worked side by side in the fading light until the sky folded itself into night. And somewhere between brushing down horses, mending weathered fences, and sharing silent lunches under the sprawling shade of the old oak tree, something invisible began to weave itself between them. A connection. A trust. A truth that neither of them was ready to say out loud. But secrets like that, the ones held in stolen glances and unspoken words, they rarely stay hidden for long. One afternoon, the world changed. Heavy, bruised-looking clouds rolled across the sky, swallowing the sun whole. The ranch darkened, the air growing thick and heavy, charged with the unmistakable warning of a coming storm. Caleb stood watching the horizon, his jaw tight, a familiar tension in his shoulders. "We need to bring the herd in," he told Emma, his voice low and urgent. "Now, before the storm hits." She simply nodded and followed him out into the field. The wind was already whipping hard, a wild thing unleashed, and dust stung her cheeks. The horses were restless, their bodies tense, sensing the danger in the air. Emma helped guide them toward the relative safety of the shelter, her movements becoming more confident, more practiced. But one young Mare, wide-eyed with fear, broke away from the group. She bolted toward the far fence, running with a blind, desperate panic. Without a second thought, Emma chased after her. "Emma, wait!" Caleb shouted from behind her, his voice sharp with alarm. But the wind was a roaring beast now, and it snatched his words, carrying them away before they could reach her. Emma reached the mare, her fingers fumbling but finding their purchase on the trailing rope. She tried to calm the frantic animal, her voice a soothing murmur lost in the rising gale. But then the rain came. There wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a sudden, violent downpour, as if the sky itself had cracked open. Thunder exploded overhead, a deafening crack that shook the very ground beneath her feet. The horse reared, its powerful body jerking Emma completely off balance. She stumbled hard, landing in the slick mud as the terrified mare dragged her a few feet. Her palms burned. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. And just before the real panic could take hold of her, Caleb was there. He grabbed the rope from her hands, using his solid weight and unwavering steadiness to bring the mare under control. Rain poured over both of them in relentless sheets, plastering their hair to their faces and soaking them to the bone. He tied the rope securely to a fence post and then turned to her, his face a mask of fierce, raw worry. "Emma, what were you thinking?" His voice wasn't angry, it was something far more potent. It was fear, thinly disguised. She sat up, her chest heaving, mud clinging to her clothes. I couldn't just let her run into the storm. "You could have been hurt," he said, his voice tight. "Badly." Emma tried to push herself up. True, she was fine, but her knee buckled beneath her. In an instant, Caleb caught her, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her securely against him. She could feel his heartbeat through his soaked shirt, strong, fast, real. For a long, suspended moment, she didn't care about the rain or the mud or the thunder booming around them. All she felt was him, the solid strength of him, holding her up. Ignoring her weak protests, Caleb lifted her gently into his arms. He carried her toward the stables, his steps sure even on the muddy ground. Once inside the dry, earthy-smelling barn, he set her down carefully on a soft pile of hay, then knelt in front of her. The storm raged outside, but in here there was a fragile quiet. "You keep risking yourself," he said, his voice quiet now, pushing a wet strand of her hair out of her eyes with a surprising gentleness. "Why?" Emma swallowed, a tremor running through her that had nothing to do with the cold. It was from everything she had held inside, everything she had never dared to say aloud. "Because," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "because I don't want to be useless. I don't want to be the boring, plain girl who breaks everything she touches." Caleb stared at her, a look of stunned disbelief on his face, quickly followed by a deep, aching hurt for her. Who told you that?" She just shook her head, unable to meet his gaze. "Life did. People did. I've always felt like I was never enough. Never pretty enough. Never interesting enough. Never anything." He leaned closer, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat onto the dirt floor. His voice dropped to a near whisper, intimate and intense. "Emma, look at me." She hesitated, then slowly she lifted her eyes to meet his. "You think I don't see you?" he said softly, his gaze holding hers. "You think the world hasn't tried to break me too? You think I don't know what it feels like to be invisible?" Her breath caught in her throat. Caleb's voice deepened, thick with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "Pretty isn't what makes a person worth loving. Pretty doesn't stay when life gets hard. But you—" He reached out and touched her hand, his calloused fingers tracing her knuckles gently, almost reverently. "You stayed with that horse even when you were scared. You wake up every single day fighting battles that no one else even sees. You show up even when you feel small." His thumb brushed over her skin again. "That's not plain," he whispered, his voice resonating deep in her soul. "That's courage." Emma's eyes flooded with tears, but this time she didn't look away. She let him see her, all of her. The broken pieces, the crippling doubts, and the quiet strength she never knew she had. And then, in the quiet hum of the rain on the stable roof, Caleb said the words that shattered every wall she had ever built around her heart. "You're enough." You are more than enough. And if being honest and brave and real makes you not pretty, then I will choose that kind of beauty every single damn day. Emma stared at him, unable to speak, her heart pounding a new steady rhythm in her chest. He wasn't trying to flatter her. He wasn't trying to save her. He was simply telling her the truth, the one she had been starving to hear her whole life. The storm raged on outside, a symphony of wind and rain, but inside that stable, something had finally calmed. A heart, a fear, a lifetime of corrosive doubt. Caleb stood slowly, his movements deliberate, and helped her to her feet. "Come on," he murmured, his voice soft again. "Let's get you warm." Emma leaned on him, her steps unsteady but her soul feeling lighter than it had ever been. As they walked through the rain back to the main cabin, she realized something profound. This wasn't just a ranch, this wasn't just a job. And Caleb wasn't just a cowboy. He was the first person who had ever truly seen her and hadn't looked away. And the girl who used to whisper to herself, "I'm not pretty," was finally beginning to understand. Pretty had nothing to do with love. It had everything to do with the truth. The morning rain had washed the ranch clean, making everything glisten. Puddles shimmered like tiny mirrors, and the fresh scent of soil felt like a new beginning. Inside me, something deeper had shifted too. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't wake up dreading my own reflection. I didn't feel less. I didn't feel like hiding. Instead, I woke up thinking of Caleb, and that scared me more than any storm. When I got to the barn, he was already there, feeding the horses. He looked up and gave me a gentle nod, but something was different. His eyes lingered for just a moment longer than usual. His jaw seemed tighter, his movements quieter. He wasn't avoiding me, but he wasn't acting normal either. My stomach tied itself in a knot. Was it because of last night? Had I said too much? Had he gotten too close? I swallowed hard and walked toward him. "Morning," I said softly. He replied, "Morning." The silence that followed wasn't cold or awkward. It was full. Full of all the things we felt but hadn't found the courage to say. I started working beside him, and with every shared glance, a spark of warmth I didn't know how to handle ignited within me. Each time our hands accidentally brushed, a quiet electricity shot through my arm. I knew Caleb felt it too. He tried to act like it was nothing, but I saw the way his breath would catch, his shoulders tense, and then his eyes soften. Finally, as we were walking toward the paddock, he broke the silence. "Emma, about last night," my heart leaped into my throat. He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the right words. "I didn't mean to overwhelm you. I just wanted you to know what I see. What I feel." A wave of relief washed over me. "You didn't overwhelm me," I managed to say. "You helped me." Caleb let out a long breath, but then another emotion flickered in his eyes. Something he'd been holding back for a very long time. Before he could say anything else, a car horn blared from the ranch gate. I turned and my chest tightened instantly. I knew that car. It was my sister's, the one who always called me plain, the one who made me feel small. The person I had run away from. Her name is Lily, and as she stepped out of the car, she looked just as I remembered. Tall, polished, and effortlessly gorgeous. Her eyes swept over the ranch with a look of pure annoyance before they landed on me. "Wow," she said, crossing her arms. "You really did run away to a farm." I stood there, frozen. Caleb moved just a little closer to me, not intruding, just being present. Silence, a silent shield. Lily's gaze shifted to him, her eyebrows arching. "So, is he why you disappeared?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but she cut me off. "Come on, Emma, you're not the type men fall for." "You know that." Her words hit me like a physical blow. All the old wounds tore open, the old pain rushed back in, and the familiar lies started whispering in my head. For a split second, I felt myself shrinking, becoming that little girl again who believed she wasn't pretty enough, not interesting enough, just not enough. But then Caleb spoke. His voice was quiet, steady, and sharp as the truth itself. "Ma'am," he said, looking directly at Lily, "you don't get to decide her worth." Lily scoffed. "She knows it." "She always has." Caleb took a step forward. He wasn't aggressive, but he was completely uncheckable. "No, she knows your version of her worth." "That's different." I just stared, unable to move. Caleb glanced at me, his eyes filled with a strength I'd never been able to find in myself. He turned back to my sister. "Emma is strong. She is brave. She works harder than most people I've ever met. She's honest, kind, and she doesn't run from storms, she walks straight into them. My vision started to blur with tears. He wasn't finished. If you can't see her value, that's not her failing. That's yours. Lily's mouth fell open, completely stunned. In that moment, something fierce and alive bloomed inside my chest. For the first time in my entire life, someone was defending me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because they saw me, truly saw me. Lily muttered something under her breath and shook her head. Whatever. If you want to play farmer, go ahead. Don't expect me to clean up the mess when this falls apart. She got back in her car and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. As the dust settled, I stood there trembling not with fear, but with freedom. Caleb turned to me gently. You okay? I could only nod, my voice shaky. I think that was the first time I didn't believe her. A soft smile touched Caleb's lips. Good, I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Caleb, why did you defend me like that? He took a slow step closer. Because you deserved it. I shook my head. No, I whispered. There was something else. I saw it in your eyes. Caleb took a deep breath, his jaw tightening as his eyes softened. And then he finally stopped holding back. Emma, he said, his voice low. I didn't just see your worth last night. I've been seeing it since the day you first stepped out of that car. My breath hitched. I've tried to give you space. I didn't want to scare you. But every day you make it harder to pretend I don't. He hesitated, struggling. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Don't? What? Caleb met my eyes, and for a moment, the entire world went still. Don't care about you, he finished, his voice raw and full of emotion. My lips parted, trembling. Caleb. He shook his head slightly. You don't owe me anything. I just couldn't let you keep believing those lies about yourself. I took a step closer, closing the small distance between us. So tell me the truth, I whispered. Your truth. Not my sister's. Not the world's. Yours. Caleb let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. The truth is, he said quietly, you're the strongest person I've ever met. You're real. You're honest, and He swallowed hard. I've fallen for you. Exactly as you are. The world around me blurred. The rain, the pain, the insecurity, every single wound I had ever carried. It all just faded away in that one perfect moment. I whispered back, I've fallen too. I just didn't think I was allowed to. Caleb stepped so close our foreheads were almost touching. With me, he said, his voice warm, you're allowed to be everything you are. My breath trembled. Even if I'm not pretty? Caleb smiled softly, lifting my chin with his gentle fingers. Emma, you're more than pretty. He leaned closer, his voice a warm whisper right next to my ear. You're honest. And then he kissed me. It was a slow, steady, heart-shifting kiss. A kiss that didn't ask me to be more than I was. A kiss that didn't need me to be fancy or polished. It was a kiss that saw every broken part of me. And chose me anyway. When we finally pulled apart, the world felt brand new. And so did I.